Hi guys, welcome to another lecture video. I'm doing this video in case we wind up not opening up on time in March, and in case some of our other members miss their due dates for their videos, okay, which can happen. I'm pretty sure most of your videos are going to be far more elaborate than anything that I can put up there, okay? The topic of this video is battle tactics, tactics in battle. And this video is brought to you by Sam, who raised the question and really wanted to hear thoughts on battle tactics and how battles were won. This was way before COVID started, way before we closed. It was actually planned for something in March that we would do this during a regular practice day. And well, COVID happened and that class did not happen. Truthfully, though, I'm kind of glad it didn't happen during regular class time. Looking at the lecture that I wrote out, it seems like it's going to be a pretty long one. I am actually going to be filming it in 3 different films so that it's easier to upload. But I think Jeremiah is going to combine them all together. So we'll see what he does. We'll see what magic he can do, okay? So this video is brought to you by Sam, and the topic is battle tactics, okay? The first thing we need to understand is that when we talk about battle tactics, we are, and this may seem like just common sense, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. We are talking about fights between multiple people on both sides, okay? We're not talking about a one-on-one fight or a one person against 2 person or a formal duel where everything is, written down and there are rules you have to follow. We're talking about multiple person battles, multiple unit battles, which means that there are different types of arms, there are different types of armor, and there are different types of troops. And this goes for anything from a 3-on-3 to a 1,000, 3,000, 4,000 against, 10,000, whatever it may be. Some of it is common sense if you think about it. For those of you who play RPG, your missile troops, your magic users, they're in the back. They shoot at the bad guy. The tanks are in front holding off the bad guy, and then you got the thieves running around stabbing people in the back. But now we're going to talk about it in a much larger scale here, okay? Using specific troops and no magic. There's no magic, okay? The very first thing I want everybody to understand, get it in their head, is that there are different tactics for different times using different weapons and different troops, okay? So there's no one right way of thinking in tactics. There is, however, basic ideas, which I'm going to talk about in this particular lecture, okay? That if you understand these basic ideas, then the odds are you'll be able to find yourself pretty okay in just about every tactical situation, as long as you do what I tell you that, you must concentrate on, all right? So because there's different tactics for different times, I am going to focus on the Renaissance times. Why? Because we are a Renaissance guild, and because that is the area that we should be focusing on, all right? If you want to hear about tactics in Roman times, Greek times, the Danes with the Vikings, the Celtics, the Saxons, World War I, World War II, Civil War, whatever it may be, ask, okay? I may not do an actual full-on panel. Sorry, there's a fly bugging me. I may not do an actual full-on panel, but you know what? If you want to come over with some beers and some food, yeah, we can sit around, get a little tipsy, and talk all about it. Those of us who go fishing with me, those of us who go fishing with me, hey, if you want to bring some brewskis to talk about it, and by the way, it usually does take a little alcohol to get me talking about some of this stuff, okay? Because it's hard to bring it into mind. It's another life. It's a different time, okay? So, yeah, today we're going to focus on the basic ideas, the basics of what you need to know as a commander, and I am going to assume that you're watching this video as a commander wanting to know how to lead your troops. Okay? So as a commander, the first thing we need to understand, tactics are different than strategy. Okay? It's a weird thing. It's two different words that a lot of people use together, and it's wrong because, well, it just is. There is a difference. Strategy is your overall goal over multiple battles through a campaign. In fact, maybe the ultimate goal of going to war and having a fight in the first place. Is it true that sometimes you do one battle and the war is over? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, during tribal times, that's usually how it kind of works out. But the truth is you should have an overall strategy, an overall goal as to why you're fighting and what your ultimate idea, what you're trying to accomplish with your fighting. I'm going to be very honest and tell you that I suck at strategy, okay? This is why anybody can pretty much beat me at chess. I suck at strategy. I cannot sit there and tell you a 48 move plan to take the king off the board. I can't do it. I just can't. I am very good at tactics because, you know, I was trained as a non-commissioned officer. I was trained as a sergeant. And sergeants are more concerned with with tactics than they are with strategy. The how to fight the one battle you're in order to win it. So taking it back to the chess analogy, hey, yeah, I may not be able to give you 48 moves to take that king. I can definitely give you 6 moves to take that knight or that bishop or that queen. Okay, so understand that there is a difference between strategy and tactics. And here today, we're talking about tactics, how to use what you have, the goals that you must have in mind in order to win that one battle / fight that you're in with however many troops are involved. Okay, now, the basic tactical ideas, the basic things that you need to worry about as a tactician in that one battle, okay? Depending on what your overall strategy goal is, what you have to worry about in order to survive, in order to win the field, so to speak, is the following. Number 1, how to destroy the enemy, okay? Kill them all. Seems kind of simple, but it does kind of work, okay? Now, the truth is, especially in Renaissance times, not everybody's going to die. You're not going to kill all of your enemy. The nobles are going to surrender. You're going to hold them for ransom. Always a couple of the small troopers are going to run away or hide away. Some of the cavalry may ride away. But the idea is to overwhelm the enemy and destroy them. So that's the first one. Second tactical thing is to stop the enemy from advancing. They're coming at you. You may be in a fortification. You may not be, but they're coming at you. How do you stop these guys? How do you make them stop? How do you hurt them so bad that they go away and they realize, maybe it's not worth fighting these guys. It's not worth it. Okay? Another ideal or goal is to attack the enemy and take their ground or fortifications, okay? You are advancing into their land and they have a fort. They have a little, a shield wall, whatever it may be. And you have to get past them in order to continue to advance to help your overall strategy. But in this battle, you have to get past this fort or this wall. How do you do that? What do you do for that? Okay? And the last one is to hold your position or hold your fortification. The enemy is advancing on you. You have a shield wall. You are in a fort. And how do you hold? How do you make sure they don't get past you so that they can damage the interior of your country, your lands, or your formations? These are the basic tactical goals or ideas. Destroy the enemy. Stop the enemy advance. Attack the enemy and take their fortification or ground. Hold your fortification or ground. These are your basic goals. Now, in order to do this, ultimately, and keep in mind, I'm thinking like a Marine, and I'm sure there are other generals who will think differently, and in history, there are other generals who've acted differently. But in my mind, the best way to do this is to kill as many of them as possible till they don't want to fight no more. Seems kind of simple, yes? Okay. You do this by, number one, making useless their arms, by countering their arms. We'll get to that in another section. By maneuver, by fortification or siege. I'm not going to talk a lot about fortification or siege because it is a static situation, and there's really no way to really talk about it in line with tactics except hold your ground. If you want to hear about it, then ask. I would be happy to talk with you about it, again, over some beers or, drawing out a visual aid for you. Okay? But yeah, basically that's it, guys. I mean, the big basic thing to remember is, destroy the enemy, stop enemy advance, attack and take position or ground, hold position or ground. And you do this by hitting them so hard that they don't want to fight no more. And you do that by making useless their arms through countering their arms, through maneuver, or through fortification. Okay? That's the end of part 1. Hey, about 11 minutes, just about what I wanted. So stay tuned for part 2. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And we are now on part 2 of my panel on tactics. This is the longest portion, so bear with me, okay? So the truth of the matter is that we have heard everything from part 1. We know what our basic goals are, what our basic ideals are, and ultimately it comes down to the troops, okay? As with every fight, it comes down to the persons who are fighting. So the first thing, in order to understand tactics and what tactics are available to you and what tactics you can use, as a commander, you need to understand your troops, okay? Now, keeping in mind, we are once again focusing on Renaissance tactical ideas, okay? So again, it will be different depending on what age you're playing or what century that you're talking about. But in general, for the Renaissance, you have the following troops. You have scouts and skirmishers. You have missile troops, and this includes archery and crossbow. You have cannon. You have cavalry, you have infantry, and those are broken up into polearm type and melee type, and conscript types. You have engineers, okay? By the way, I would like to point out that the Renaissance was one of the first times where engineers were considered part of military troops. They were not frontline troops, but they were, for the first time, actually hired as engineers to do nothing but engineering and paid to do nothing but engineering. So, kind of a neat thing, okay? All of these troops, scouts, skirmishers, missiles, cannons, cavalry, infantry, engineerings, have advantages and disadvantages, and they cancel each other out, okay? If you've ever played Fire Emblem, if you've ever played Advance Wars, you'll know what I'm talking about, okay? But we'll get into that a little bit later on, okay? So let's talk about these troops. We're going to start with the scouts, okay? Scouts are used to seek out the enemy, to check the terrain, to carry messages, to scurry in front, skirmishers as they're called, okay? They're usually mounted, but each infantry unit does have some scouts too. They're lightly armored and they're lightly armed because speed is the key. They need to get there and back. The information is more important than killing the enemy, okay? It is very important that they are trained in accurate tracking and reporting. They are not good at holding the line or the fortifications, but they are very good at delaying the enemy, doing quick runs and raids. Many generals arm their scouts with bows, horse bows, okay? During the Renaissance times, it was considered a very ungentlemanly thing to do, but if the general doesn't order it and the captain and the lieutenants order it, well, then they're not gentlemen, so it's quite okay for you to do it, all right? So for the next part of the troops is the missile troops. Missile troops during the Renaissance is kind of a weird thing, all right? we all know that the English archers were king of the battlefield. They got the best pay. They were very much beloved. They were very much hated in medieval times. But in the Renaissance, they did not use archers as much. The concept of gentlemanly combat wasn't really used. English longbowmen still made very good money, but there were not as many of them. Okay, there weren't as many of them. Why? Because there are guns and cannons now, more and more. Okay. Missile troops also include crossbowmen, and crossbowmen were used more and more. Why? Because they were cheaper, they were faster. You can hire them. If you come from the city of Genoa of Italy and you grew up to be a great crossbow shooter, then you will definitely have your fortunes made by going to war, because you can get really, really good pay. An archer is used for breaking up the charges by raining arrows down upon the enemies so they can't charge anymore. Too many of them are dying. They are used for sniping. It was not considered cool. It was not considered gentlemanly, but they did it. Okay. They're usually infantry, so they're kind of slow to get to where they need to be, especially since most of the time they will need protection. You will need to have stakes or something in front of them. You will have to have swine quills placed in front. So they're kind of slow to get to where they need to be. They also have a huge resupply issue. The truth of the matter is, and if you were just shooting into that mass target of enemy troops, referring back to the first panel, how soon can you empty your quiver? Okay, most quivers back then carried 24 arrows. Okay, 24. How fast can you empty them? There is a huge resupply issue if you get into a sustained fight. Okay. Archers are great for defense. They're great for a defensive position. They're great for traps or ambushes, but they cannot hold down ground. They cannot. They can help cover a fortification, but if the enemy breaks through your fort, they can't hold it for you. Okay, all they can do is delay. All right. The next type of troop we're talking about is going to be cannon. Okay. Now, cannon is a mixed group, okay? When I say cannon, I mean cannons, real cannons, gunpowder guns, rifles, muskets, whatever you want to call them, and engineers, okay? They're all one. Why? Because a lot of this sciencey stuff was brand new, and it was just easier to put them all into one group. Also, thinking back to the logics of the people in olden times, well, cannons use gunpowder, pistols and our muskets use gunpowder. The engineers use gunpowder when they want to blow up a wall or sapper underneath the wall. It all must be one thing. So let's just put it all in one. So that's why. Okay. The key to remember was that gunpowder was not relatively new, but relatively new for combat and warfare, at least for the Renaissance in Europe. Okay, I'm not talking about China, I'm not talking about Japan, but in Renaissance times in Europe, it's relatively new. Most of your cannonballs were made out of stone. They would chip it and grind it to as round as it can, and they would just throw it into the cannon barrel. There were still trebuchets and catapults used because a lot of times it was cheaper and faster than cannons. And they're mostly used for fortifications and siege. Okay. The average arming time of a musket or a pistol, whatever, quite honestly, was maybe around a minute. Okay. That's not very fast if you think about it. The average loading and firing time for a cannon could be hours, because you have to get it just right, because if you don't, it blows up and everybody dies. Okay. In fact, there are records of sieges where it was considered a very successful day with their cannons because you got 4 rounds off in a 16-hour day. Okay? And engineers are used, of course, to build walls, to build trenches, to sapper underneath walls, and they're not really a combat unit type. Okay, the engineers, the cannons, the riflemen, they're there. They're there to do their one shot, their one special thing, and they're done. Okay. Keep in mind also they need lots of supplies. Okay, gunpowder was not mixed in any type of what's the word I'm looking for? Set quality measurement. So you could have gunpowders that come from point A, that's awesome, and point B, and they just go fits, and that's it. Okay. They're also very easy to overrun because they're so slow to load. Yes, many of them will have knives. Many of them will have axes, mostly axes, actually. They'll definitely have hammers, and they may even have some swords, okay? But they're very easy to overrun because they're not taught to fight and train as one unit, okay? The next type of troop is the ones where many of our people love, and I personally love it, okay, is cavalry. And when I say cavalry, I don't mean the scouts, okay? I mean men on horseback that are trained, taught to be one unit, to fight as one unit, to be nothing but actual fighters, okay? Even still in the Renaissance, cavalry was considered a post for nobles, sons of nobles. It was the king of battle. To be able to afford to be a cavalry officer or even a cavalry trooper or a cavalryman was a big thing. It was very, very, very important. Cavalry are fast because they're on horses. They're hard-hitting because when they hit, they add the weight of the man and the armor and the weapon and the horse, and they hit 1 point, okay? But they are very expensive, okay? 99% of the time, when you see cavalry in the Renaissance time, the cavalrymen, be it an officer or a trooper, owned their own gear and their own horse. In fact, it was very common to buy your way into a regiment or a troop by showing up with your own horse, with your own gear, and maybe a couple of remounts, and maybe a servant with you, okay? That's how you got into it. It is not uncommon for a trooper who distinguished himself in battle to be given these arms and these horses so that he can be in the cavalry. Okay. One point I do want to point out during the Renaissance is that not all cavalry members were knights. Okay. Key, very important key point. Because of the numbers of people going into battle, because of the need for people on horseback, not all cavalry members in the Renaissance were knights. Most of them were, especially the officers and the sergeants, but it is quite possible, for example, if you were a wealthy merchant's third son, second son, fourth son, whatever, daddy bought you the horses, bought you the armor, pat you on the back, sent you off to join the army as a cavalryman. A perfect example of this would be D'Artagnan in the Three Musketeers. I know he's more 17th century, but bear with me here. The family didn't have anything. You know, if you read the book, his father had a horse, a sword, some nice clothes, put his son on it, and sent him off to make his fortune. So remember that cavalry during the Renaissance does not have to be knights. It is quite okay to be a cavalry person without being a knight. We play dragoons, which is a form of cavalry, okay? And not all of us are knights, which is very common towards back then, all right? The other thing to remember is that there are two types of cavalry. There is heavy cavalry, okay? They have more armor. They use the heavy lance. They use a lot of swords. They use a lot of hammers. They use a lot of axes. Their basic usage is to hit the enemy line and break it, so that A, the light cavalry can come in, and B, so that the infantry can come in and finish them off. There's light cavalry. They usually have lances, light lances, javelins. They have a lot less armor, so maybe not a full head-to-toe armor, maybe just a breastplate, okay? They're usually going to be using swords, although I know everybody's going to sneak an extra knife, an extra axe in there, okay? They tend to have shields, and a lot of times they're honestly just used as dismounted infantry, which is infantry that gets to where they're supposed to fight because they're fast, they're on their horse, they can get there fast, they jump off their horse, and then they fight on foot. This, by the way, is a dragoon. That is what we are. That is what we play, okay? We get there on horseback, in wagons, however we get there, and we jump off our horse, and we fight dismounted. Now, keeping in mind, there are elite infantry there are elite cavalry out there. The Polish Winged Regiment, the French Cuirassiers during the 17th century. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the 16th century. We're talking about Renaissance, okay? Heavy and light. Very important. The next one we need to talk about is the infantry. The infantry is the most interesting part because it is the most messed up part. It is the part that has the most mixed gear. If there are conscripts, they may have no gear. They may just have a rake, a shovel, a hoe, whatever they can pick up around their farm because their lord said, you're going to fight. Let's go. Bring enough food. That's it. Okay? Infantry covers the elite sword and shield noble royal guards to the plain peon conscripts. So it's very, very, very mixed up. Okay? However, in the Renaissance period, we can say that, number one, mostly there are pole arms. Okay? There are two types of pole arms, which is the spear or the pike, or the hammer and the axe. Okay? I'm not going to go into what these things look like. I'm sure you know what they look like. I'm not going to go into how they're used. That's a different topic. That's individual troop tactics and usage. But most of the time, your troops are going to be pole arms. Why? Well, one, because it's easy, it's cheap. It's easy to make. It's also pretty easy to train, okay? Any person who's gone to boot camp in the modern age can be taught to be a polearmsman in about a week, in my opinion, okay? Okay, maybe not the Navy because they don't train formations as much, but yeah. But the thing is that they're slow. They're easy to mix up because if one person drops their pike, he's going to knock down a row of other people. They need the unity. You cannot have small, in my personal opinion, lesser than 20 people in a polearm unit to have it effective. But they're very good to make the other side react or to stop the other side from advancing or doing tricks that they're going to do. Okay? So that's the polearms. The next are the men-at-arms. Okay? These are guys with swords, axes, hammers. And these are the real pros. To be very honest with you, in the Renaissance time, these are the real pros. The funny thing is that 70% of the time, they're actually mercenaries. They're not actually people belonging to the king or lord or noble who is the general of the army. They're actually mercenaries paid to be there. And if you are good at a specific weapon, you can make a pretty good living for yourself if you don't get killed by being a mercenary. Interesting side note, a lot of these mercenary companies not only would sell their services as men-at-arms, they would have a separate unit to sell their services as archers, okay? And usually the archers would get a little bit more pay, to be very honest with you. A lot of documents and stories say, oh, the men-at-arms didn't feel that was fair. But to be very honest with you, I felt that was very fair because the men-at-arms were the ones who were going to go into enemy territory. So they would get all the loot if the fight was won. Archers have to stay back because they can't hold ground. They can't get to the loot like the men-at-arms. So in the end, I feel that it kind of evens out. Okay? But the men-at-arms were the ones that were supposed to go in and get the kill. Once the cavalry makes a breach, once the pikemen forces the other side to change formation and expose one flank or the other, these are the guys that comes in and gets really, really dirty and gets in for the kill. The thing with the men-at-arms, though, is, one, if 70% of them are mercenary, they need to be paid. And if you don't start winning some battles, if you don't start taking some castles, if you don't start hitting some convoys, and they don't get paid and they don't get fed, they're gone. Bye-bye. 70% of your army, they're gone. Okay? The second thing is they do fight for money. They do fight for pay, and so they're hard to control. If you want them to hold in place and not loot, rape, or pillage a place, that's probably not going to happen. For many of them, they consider that part of their pay, believe it or not. The next type of troop you have is the type of troops that I like to think that we're playing by being the Danish Dragoons. And these are the noble guards. Now, that doesn't mean that the troops are noble. It means they are the specific household guards of nobles. Kings, lords, dukes, churchmen, whatever it may be. Most of the time, I would say 80% of the time, they're going to be in uniform, all right? Or they're going to have something on them that makes it a part of a uniform, be it a tabard, be it the favor that we wear. Don't look at that one. That's not the favor we're wearing. Be it the guild beret. Most of the time, they're going to have some form of uniformity because they represent a noble. They're going to mostly be swordsmen, okay? Because a sword is a noble weapon, because the noble wants to look good, most of the time their main weapon is going to be a sword. Now, doesn't mean you can't have an axe, doesn't mean you can't shoot a bow, doesn't mean you can't use, a knife, like, sorry, I was looking up at it, but doesn't mean you can't use a knife like Twilight Knights, okay? You can, but your main weapon is probably going to be a sword because you are a guardsman. They're going to be mostly be found by the boss, by the leader, by the general, by the king, whoever it may be. And the truth of the matter is sometimes they kind of suck. They're out of shape because all they do is stick by the boss in a palace, or they ride everywhere they go. They don't march. They don't train as heavily because many times the members of this guard are nobles. Okay, they are younger sons of nobles that were accepted in the guard so that they have a way to make a living. That's not us, by the way. That's not us. You are the duke. You're the duke's guards there to guard the king. So we do train. All right. But the truth is these guys are mostly static. They're not going to be the guys charging into the breach, going over the walls. They're mostly static. So understand that you can't expect them to do some of the things that other men-at-arms do. The last but not least is conscripts. Conscripts are basically peasants, people on the farms, people in the towns that have been pulled by their lord or king saying, you must fight now. Okay? They have very mixed arms. They have very mixed armor, usually whatever they can get. Sometimes whatever they pick up off of a dead body, okay? Although it is true that many conscripts have made their way into the world by picking up arms from dead bodies and then using them correctly. Most of the time, they have had no training whatsoever. If they're English, they're almost all archers because, again, if you go back to my first panel, from the age of 8, they've been practicing archery, okay? And they'll almost never hold a line. You can count on them to hold a wall. You can count on them to hold a fort, but they're not shield wall fighters. Why? Because they are not professional full-time warriors. They're not. And you can't expect them to be, okay? One of the things, I used to have a gunnery sergeant that played D&D with us, and he would always say conscripts are first-level goblin time wasters that unfortunately still have to be fed. What can you do, right? So the last thing I want everybody to remember before I end this part is that not all troops are going to be on every battle, on every field, all the time. It depends on the terrain, it depends on the fortification, it depends on your training, it depends on your fitness, and again, it depends on what troops you have. Sometimes all you have is archers and some swordsmen. Sometimes all you got is a couple of spearmen. Sometimes all you got is one crazy guy with an axe and a jug of freaking ale, and that's what you got. I will tell you, though, you need to know what you have, okay? You have to know that this is what I have, this is how I can use it in order to form your tactics, okay? That's the end of part 2. See you at part 3. Hey guys, part 3 of the tactics panel. All right. So now that you've heard what types of troops that you're probably going to have in a Renaissance time period, it's time to go back to the tactical ideas. All right. And that is your tactical goals, your tactical ideas is A, destroy the enemy. B, stop the enemy advance. C, take a position or fortification. Or D, defend a position or fortification. Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is that a lot of people are going to say, okay, that sounds great, but how do you do that? Well, that's the hard part. Okay? You do that by A, countering your opponent's troops. B, use your troops in the best way possible. C, use your troops in support of each other. D, overwhelm the other side. And E, sticking to your goals, your strategic goals. Okay? One of the things I always want to do in my lectures whenever we're out either at cons or at an event or at a fair is to present the information in a way that is understandable, relatable to the modern audience, okay? I'm going to do that by using video games, okay? I'm going to go a little bit backwards and say, first and foremost, hey, your major tactical goal is to stick to the goal, stick to your strategic goal, okay? What does that mean? It means unlike a video game, you don't need points. You don't get points, okay? You only need to win, all right? You don't need to pass levels to get to the other land, to get to the other parts. You only need to win. You only need to focus on whatever your goal would be. Either to kill the boss, to take the flag, to get the chocolate, to get the food, whatever it may be. Okay? So that's what I mean by sticking with the goal. Do not get distracted. There are so many historical accounts of generals who, they're fighting the main battle and they had an idea, but then they saw a troop of cavalry coming around and they sent half their army after them. You don't need to do that. Stick to your goal, okay? Or, hey, the idea is to take the town. All you need to do is take the town because you need the food that is in the storehouse in that town. But the general who took the town, honestly had the town, decides, no, we're not going to stop at the warehouses. We're going to keep going. We're going to kill all the other guys. That wasn't the goal, though. So ultimately, he left his rear undefended and he lost. Okay? If you look at video games like Advance Wars and Fire Emblem, and by the way, if you haven't, you should, because this is a very, very good way to learn tactics, okay? You'll find that every type of troop has an advantage and a disadvantage, and I think that when I went over the troops in part 2, I did tell you the advantages and disadvantages. Each other type of troop is stronger or weaker versus that troop. For instance, cavalry sucks against archery, sucks against missile troops. But once the cavalry gets into the missile troops are not melee fighters, and they can't hold, okay? Pikes are great to hold off melee fighters, sword and shield guys, okay? But once you get past through those pikes, they're no good, okay? So each type of troop has an advantage or disadvantage depending on the arms that they have and the type of troop they are. And each type of troop has an advantage and a disadvantage depending on the formation that they are set in. Now, I'm not going to talk about troop formations because, quite frankly, that is something that maybe somebody, hint, 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 should bring up the next time we do COD. And honestly, that is something that if you've been doing COD for a couple of years, you should see the advantages and disadvantages of every formation, okay? I will say that every formation we do in COD can be writ large. By that, I mean that it can be done from a company size to a battalion size to an army size, okay? It's the same formation, only lots bigger, okay? So I'm not going to talk about it. If you really want it, ask, okay? The truth is that a lot of times in these video games, these advantages and disadvantages are the same as in real life. So, it's kind of a neat thing. Check it out if you get a chance. Now, guys, I'm not talking about modern warfare, okay? Modern warfare, we have air, we have artillery that is way better than anything that they had in the past. We're talking about special forces. We're talking about vertical envelopment. I'm a huge fan of vertical envelopment, okay? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Renaissance times, okay? Even in Renaissance times, just like in the video games, it's very true. Every troop has an advantage. Every troop has disadvantage. And depending on how you use them in combination is how you're going to achieve your goal, okay? The key is to know your troops, to use them to counter, to move, to destroy, or to hold. That's the key. All right. Now, at this point, as we're getting close to the end of this entire huge long panel, it may seem, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of underwhelming that I'm going to end it this way. But the truth is that I cannot go any further into detail without a whiteboard or visual aids or playing out situations, okay? Now, if you want me to do that, I can definitely do that if I can get somebody else to hold the damn camera when I do the visual aid. If you want it, ask, okay? But the truth is, the basics of tactics is just what I've pointed out here in this panel. If you understand what troops to use against what your opponent is using, if you understand what your basic strategic goal is overall, so that tactically all you're going to focus on is what the goal is, you're going to win in tactics, okay? If anybody has any questions, if anybody has any comments, if anybody would like to see some of the other things that I've talked about that I didn't want to use time to talk about here, let me know. I will say right now, guys, look, I understand for a lot of you doing this panel is just a fun thing, but I feel there's a lot of good information and things to be learned here, okay? And if you don't comment, if you don't ask, if you don't request, if you don't even just say, hey man, can we start a email conversation? Can we start a while we're at lunch or dinner after practice or archery conversation? You're never going to know. And it's going to be one of those things that you may think about and, you just don't know. And you've missed out on that knowledge. Okay? So ask. All right? Ask questions, make comments about these panels. Not just mine, but everybody's. Okay? So guys, hey, it's turned out overall to be about a 40-minute panel if you add all three parts. It was not my thinking that it would be this long, but I'm glad I had the chance to have the time during this COVID time to film this for you. Okay? Sam, I hope this answers some of your questions. I hope at the very least it teaches everybody the basics of what you need to know as far as thinking tactically. And yeah, let me know if you want to know more. Bye.